right, it is 10 o'clock, so we're going to get rolling. My name is Noah Newman, technology editor with Strip Till Farmer. Great to have everyone with us today. Looks like we're going to have a lot of people here, so we're excited for that. Welcome to this webinar, Combating Dry Soils and Drought with Strip Till, Water Infiltration and Savings, hosted by Orthman by Unverfirth. It's a very timely webinar, of course, with many of you in the Corn Belt and beyond experiencing drought conditions this summer. Our presenter, you see him on the screen there, that is Mick Godekin, veteran agronomist and product support specialist with Orthman by Unverfirth. And Mick's going to talk about what to expect from strip till in a drought environment and how the ideal strip should react to different rainfall events. Now, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A icon. You type in your questions during the presentation. If you have anything you want to ask Mick, I'll see the question, I'll relay it to Mick during the presentation, and he'll get an answer to you. So without further ado, let's get it going. Mick, take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you. And do go ahead and interrupt with questions. It's a lot easier for me to go back and answer a question right away than to have to go back 20 slides or so and try to find a spot to do it. So please ask questions as we're going along here. So let's start out with who I am, Mick Godekin with Orthman by Unverfirth. I've been here for about 3 years. Prior to that, I worked in research. I've done retail ag. I've done soil testing, and I've done been working in the seed corn environment. So I've been around a little bit. You can see that from the gray in my hair and my beard. So I like to use those experiences and talk about different things throughout the growing season. And really, when we started thinking about this a month and a half ago or longer even, and started to think, what can we talk about? And I look at the drought map and I see everybody in the Corn Belt, especially those 10 major corn producing states, we're under a lot of moisture stress. So let's talk about that and see how that strip till can help with those types of problems. So kind of what to expect today. We'll talk about how does drought affect corn. Primarily corn. We'll dive in if somebody has questions on soybeans or some other crops. I may or may not have the correct answers for those, but I'll give it a shot. We'll examine the 2023 growing season thus far and see where we're at and where we came from and maybe give some predictions. We'll examine the dry conditions that we're under. All of the Corn Belt is under moisture stress of some kind. We'll talk about strip till basics, and anytime I get a chance to talk about the basics of strip till, I'm going to jump on it and make sure that we are all thinking about those basics of strip till and what the purpose is. And then we're going to discuss roots and strip till and what strip till does to the rooting system of a corn plant. We'll look at some research with some limited water. You think about limiting water, where can we do that? In the Western Corn Belt, we've had the opportunity because we're always short on rainfall. So we can do research and actually limit water and see what happens. And then we'll understand pore space and how strip till can change it. And from there, we'll inspect some infiltration data. We don't have much. And a lot of the data that I'm going to talk about today, it's not new. Unfortunately, the way this industry has worked, we have changed the way we do things. We're all chasing yield. We want to get after that top end yield. And sometimes we don't research some of the basics that I think that we should. So we'll look at some data. I don't care the age of the data. We can learn from that data from the past. So I want to start next with a picture that I took on June 13th, and I'm going to throw that up on the screen. This corn was planted May 1st. Look at that seed on June 13th in my hand. That seed is completely viable. All it's doing is sitting in the ground waiting for moisture. Now, who in their right mind can think that you can plant corn and another month and a half later dig up a seed that hasn't rotted because of moisture and it's completely just the same way that it was when it was put in the ground? And this is an indication of the season that we saw in the Western Corn Belt. We were so doggone dry. At my house where I live, from March until July 4th, I had an inch 63 in precipitation in that time. An inch 63 from March 1st to July 4th. Think about that and let that soak in, and you think about that's way behind normal rainfalls. The same field here is literally within a foot of that seed that I dug up that's in my hand there is one that had just emerged that week. Now, what had happened that week of June 13th is maybe we had enough dew to get down into that seed and help it germinate. I don't know. It's one of those things that it's a phenomena that we saw this year. Will we ever see it again? Absolutely. But as every agronomist says, every year is different. So this has certainly been a different year. So how does corn respond to drought stress? And this picture was taken in mid-June also in east central Nebraska and in a dryland field, and you can see the stress that corn plant was under at that point in time. So when we roll leaves, we reduce photosynthesis. The whole job of that plant, when we're in the vegetative stages, is to capture that sunlight and turn it into energy and use that to build yield. And certainly when we reduce photosynthesis, we can affect yield. Leaf rolling also limits transpiration. Well, if we limit transpiration, we reduce water loss, but we also limit respiration that's going on. So you think about this, and if we get into these hot nights in June, which we saw May and June in Nebraska and in some of those areas, that corn can't respire at nighttime. It's not cooling off and it's not breathing overnight. It's not respiring during the day either because those leaves are staying rolled. So that can be another thing that affects yields. Reduced rows around. And one of the things that I like to think about is about 45 to 55 days after emergence, that corn plant makes a decision. That corn plant decides the number of kernels around that cob. And they always come in pairs. So we have 10 to 20. 22, whatever that magic number is. But if we have drought stress, we can see those reduced down. And so maybe a corn plant that typically would put 16 around is going to put 12 around. And that certainly is going to affect yield. There's other factors that go into that determination of rows around, but the drought stress can affect that. Another thing that we see in drought stress is poor nodal root formation. And you think about those nodal roots, we're starting to develop those in June, and we're reaching out those nodal roots. And if there's no moisture there to make that switch off so that the roots can continue to grow, we see those roots not form. We get stubby or no roots, end up getting what we call floppy corn syndrome, rootless corn syndrome, whichever name that you would like to put on it. And certainly that affects our yield at the end of the season. Decreased silk formation. You think about your silks, and we're talking later in the season. So we're talking July time frame for most of the Corn Belt. Those silks are 90% water at least. And if we don't have water to help form those, we get poor silk formation. That leads to poor pollination. Reduced nutrient uptake. You think about the nutrients. Potassium's a big one that relies on water for movement. And when we think about that, potassium regulates inside the plant that turgor pressure. If we don't get the potassium in there, we get that. Also nitrogen. You think about the nutrients that require mass flow, the calciums, the magnesiums, the nitrogens. When we have those nutrients that we need to be getting into that plant and we don't have water to move those into the plant, will cause yield reductions. Lower kernel weight. So think about yield as a function of weight. And if we reduce the kernel size and the kernel weight, then we can also reduce yield. All of this, as I said all along, it turns out to be yield reduction. And so we'll take some time and think about when is it most required to have that moisture for the corn crop. And so one of the things that we look at is the average daily water use. And if we look at that, our biggest time frame of daily water use or stage that uses the most amount of water, you think about a corn plant takes about 26.1 inches, anywhere from 25 to 27, depends on who you're talking to, inches of water to produce that corn crop. That early tassel to silking stage, when we start hitting that reproductive phase, we start pushing the water use. You're talking 30 hundredths per day. And that's when that water is the most critical. We'll talk about in the next slide the amount of stress that water stress or drought stress we're putting on that corn plant at that time is the most yield limiting. But as we look at this chart here, we can cause yield loss from emergence all the way up until dent. The good news is, as we hit physiological maturity, our yield loss from drought is over. And unfortunately, the plant's life's over also, and we're just to that dry down stage. But you look at this, and when we look at the most effect on yield is that pollination and to blister. But also can see that in the milk and dough stages. If you think about the percent estimated yield loss per day of observed drought stress, and you think about where you're at today in the Corn Belt, we can see that we can really strictly limit our yields. Now, I want to talk about some of those early stresses. If we had 30 days worth of drought stress, which the Western Corn Belt definitely saw this spring, 30 days, you can lose up to 30% or more yield based off of that drought stress. And some of this we're going to have to wait and see. We're just now to that stage where we can go out and walk some of these dryland fields and get a good idea of where we're at as far as yield estimates. But it's going to take a little bit more time to actually see what happens to our crop this year. So if we think about the 2023 growing seasons, I got to hear that it's a tale of location. And in the Eastern Corn Belt, early on, moisture was there. It was okay. The Western Corn Belt, we started out really dry. As we got to the 4th of July, we started getting some timely rains. It's helped us out a little bit here. But for the first time in my career, I saw pivots running in May. Pivots aren't supposed to run in May. They're not supposed to be spinning in May. We shouldn't be turned on pivots in the Western Corn Belt till we get to the June timeframe, at least the areas where I live. You get to southwest Kansas where they pre-water, those pivots are running before they even plant, unfortunately. But then as you move eastward through Kansas and Nebraska, you should be catching more rain. Iowa had some dry spots. South Dakota had some dry spots. Missouri had dry spots early on that were really detrimental. I said it before, it's a different year. That's certainly something that I get accused of saying too much. We're fortunate and very misfortunate in this industry. We have one chance per year. Our growing cycle is one growing cycle per year. And you compare that to some of the other industries where they're producing multiple times per year. The vegetable crops, they might get 3 or 4 vegetable crops. Our row crops are once per year. We get one chance to do it right per year. So every one of those being different isn't really that unique, but it is different. And you compare 2023 drought to 2012, totally different setup for the situation. Compare that back to 2002, another totally different scenarios. So, and I can keep going back and looking at those different years, and they're all different. Let's look at the top 10 corn growing states. And I want to look at where we are today or a few weeks ago with the drought. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the percent of drought, percent of each state that is showing a drought. Then we're going to look at percent extreme and exceptional drought in parentheses there. So I want that to be clear, that the first number you're going to see is just the percent of that state that's in drought. And then in parentheses is the percent of that state that's in extreme or exceptional drought. So as much drought as we can see or that we monitor with the drought monitor. So this was as of 7/20. So we're talking a week and a half ago. Iowa, so 77% of the state of Iowa is experiencing some form of drought, not just exceptionally dry, a true drought up to exceptional drought. Now, 3.9% of that state has extreme or exceptional drought. Illinois has 66% of the state showing some form of drought, only 0.15 in the extreme or exceptional category. Nebraska, 68% of the state is experiencing drought, where 19.8% is in that extreme and exceptional category. Minnesota, 70% of the state has some form of drought, with 1.5% roughly that has that extreme to exceptional drought. Indiana, 23% of the state experiencing drought, none in that extreme or exceptional category. Lucky for them, right? We look at Kansas, 80% of the state with 31% in that extreme to exceptional. South Dakota, 25.4 and 0.2. Ohio, 13% of the state experiencing drought. You know, I was in Ohio last week, and everybody's saying, oh, we're in a drought. It's so bad. It's so dry. And I kind of look at them and smile and don't say much, but I think, man, Ohio, you're not in bad shape compared to the rest of the Corn Belt. Missouri, 78.9% of the state, 23% in extreme and exceptional. Wisconsin's at 82% of the state experiencing drought, with 8.6 in extreme and exceptional. So you look at these and you think, gosh, we got all this area, and we're growing a lot of corn in this area. And now I will say this is state by state, and we know that we don't grow corn in every part of every state or soybeans. And so we got to kind of understand that there's some abnormalities in this data. I know South Dakota being 25 and 0.2, the corn growing area of the state is probably higher than 25% of it experiencing drought. So if we look at it on average, we're showing that 58% of the Corn Belt is showing some form of drought, or the 10 major corn growing states are experiencing drought. 8.9% of that area is experiencing extreme and exceptional drought. What's that going to do to the grain markets in the future? I wish I knew, because I'm not one that understands exactly what happens to grain markets. I've been watching this thinking, oh, corn prices have got to go up. They've got to go up. And of course, I've been wrong all along. So we'll see what happens in the future. We look at that drought monitor. Now, this is from October of 2022. So when I think of growing crops, I always think in terms of water year. And so I think about that water year starting October 1st, so that we can fill that profile after the previous year's crops taken care of. So I always started October 1. So this was as close to October 1 as I could get. It was actually October 4th. So if we look at October 4th of 2022, the Western United States was in deep trouble. They had a lot of drought. California was suffering a lot of drought, and then over the winter they got to make things up. The central U.S., South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and into Texas, a lot of drought in those areas. And then if we look at the eastern corn, what I call the eastern corn belt, the Illinois, Indiana, Ohio areas, not as much drought stress. Iowa was fairly dry, so was Missouri. Minnesota was dry. Wisconsin wasn't so dry. You look at Michigan, had some dry spots in it. So let's fast forward that. What happens if we go to July? So we get into July 4th, and we see a transformation at Western United States. They had made up their deficits. They're in pretty decent shape. There's some dry spots out there. Central U.S., if I go backwards, look at Nebraska shift. The western portion of Nebraska shifts to having moderate drought to being no drought, and then eastern Nebraska took a hit. Everything shifted eastward in my thought process. Even western Kansas, they improved. Central and eastern Kansas went backwards a little bit. Missouri went backwards a little bit. Iowa picked up a few more spots of that extreme drought. But we also saw it getting drier in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. All of a sudden, Wisconsin shows up. Minnesota did not improve, got a little drier in spots. So what's that doing to our corn crop? Go to July 25th. We talked about July getting some rains. We saw all of those states improve some. But is it too little, too late, or not? We don't know. And that's the tale that we need to figure out as we move forward from today on. We need to get out here and walk these fields and see where we actually are. So you look at water year precipitation, and I use percent of normal. I think that's a great indicator. And you look at those 10 corn growing states, 10 major corn growing states that we looked at earlier, and it's no wonder that this corn's going to show some stress, because we're anywhere from 50 to 90% of annual precipitation from October 1 to July 16th. So certainly those areas that are 50 to 70% are going to take a bigger hit than those areas that are in that 70 to 90%. But we'll have to see what happens there. If we look at the calendar year, once January hit, we didn't see a lot of improvement in the eastern part of the Corn Belt, and that's where I would say that after January 1, we started going backwards in those areas. That's where you saw the western Kansas, western Nebraska improve, where eastern Nebraska, eastern Kansas, eastern South Dakota didn't improve so much. So if we look at April through June, let's think about when we planted that corn to June 30th, we were in trouble in a lot of those areas. Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, eastern Kansas, Wisconsin, especially that southern third of Wisconsin, into Minnesota, Ohio even had some areas where they've suffered in that April 1st to June 30th timeframe. We look at July 1 to July 17, and it was just a convenient way to break that data up. That's why we saw the improvements in Illinois. We saw a nice band of excessive moisture there that helped them out. Quite honestly, Ohio and Indiana, pretty much on par for normal with some spots of isolated above normal precipitation. Eastern Nebraska got a relief in that first half of July, and we're starting to see some of that still coming on and helping us out. We start seeing that western part of the United States drying out.
Mick, got a question for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, someone wants to know if strip till may also be beneficial in a wet area, or is it mainly advantageous for dry zones? They said they're experiencing a lot of rain in the eastern U.S. and eastern Canada.
So when we think about strip till in wet conditions, we can also be advantageous to that, because if we take and we break that compaction layer in that top 12 inches, we're going to allow water infiltration. If we have a compaction layer there at 4 to 6 inches that runs to 8 inches, that water is going to hit that compaction layer and want to run off of that field. And it's going to pool in that field, either pool and not go into the soil and get evaporated, or it's going to just pool and cause wet feet, what I call a wet feet situation. So getting that water to go down into the soil profile, getting it away from the root zone, would open up that, no matter what plant it is, open up that profile to produce more roots and be healthier roots. Any other questions?
That's it for right now. But yeah, if you have any questions during the presentation, there's a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Type that in and I'll see it, and I'll interrupt Mick and let him know your question.
So we've had dry weather. So now what? If I just kind of wish there was something out there that magically could help us infiltrate water better, get us more root surface so that we can explore more area and capture more water. And gosh, if we had that, we'd have it made in the shade. Well, we kind of do, because we have strip tills. So let's go back to the basics and why do we strip till? And number one is we want to remove that shallow compaction layer. Removing that shallow compaction layer helps allow better water infiltration, allows for root expansion, larger root system. Precision nutrient placement. If we can feed that plant where those roots are going to hit and we know we're going to utilize it, we can be more efficient with our nutrient use efficiencies. We can prepare a seed bed. We can prepare a seed bed that gives us a smoother ride, less planter downforce requirements, more consistent temperatures, and better emergence, more consistent emergence throughout. So those are the things that I consider strip till basics. Certainly, I think that they help us whether we're dry or wet conditions. When part of this presentation, we talk about our seed bed preparations, and in some places we want a warm seed bed. We want to create those strips so that we have warmer seed beds. In the South, we don't want to absorb the temperature and have a hot seed bed, so we adjust our strip tilling accordingly to where we're at. But the one thing that strip till gives us over conventional till is a more consistent temperature profile. So we can predict what that profile, if we look at this picture here, what that profile will look like with strip till, and be more consistent with that temperature profile than we are in the conventional till areas. This was the results of an 8-year study in eastern Colorado and western Kansas by the USDA. And that was data that they collected over 8 years, and they saw that consistency. And when you're talking consistency into soil temperature, the things that can give you as far as consistent emergence is huge. So let's think about roots, and I love to bring this up when I'm in front of a group of people, and I'll say, well, why did roots go down? And everybody says, well, because they're looking for moisture and they're looking for nutrients. And I've dug a lot of roots in my career, and I have never found that sensor that is on that people talk about is supposed to be on a corn root so that it can sense moisture and nutrients. Unfortunately, the thing that has roots going down is the exact thing that keeps our feet on the ground, and that's gravity. And we forget that gravity is what forces things down, and roots will go down if there's an opportunity. And the reason that we see roots go sideways is compaction. If we see roots going sideways or different directions, that's because they've hit a compaction layer that they cannot push through. The other thing that helps roots go downward is temperature, and we don't talk about this enough in the industry. Roots like to have a certain temperature, and if we think about corn roots, that's 53 to 65. I think it's maybe a little bit higher than that 53, but data shows that those corn roots prefer those temperatures between 53 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Bean roots like 58 to 68. So those roots, as it starts to warm up in the growing season, sunflower 60 to 72, as it starts warming up in the growing season, that soil temperature gets warmer at the surface and starts graduating downward. Those roots are going, hey, I want to escape this. It's getting hot up here. You think mid to late June, your soil temperatures at the surface are probably 85 to 90 degrees. And when we get that hot, those roots are actually desiccating and dying. So they are doing us no good at the surface. And the other roots are looking, okay, where's it cooler? Just like us, when we search out air conditioning, those roots are searching out cooler environments so that they can explore for more moisture and nutrients. Root force, and this is something that I started to touch on when I talked about roots going sideways, and roots can only exert so much force, and there's only so much energy in that plant, and it's got to divide that energy for going upward or growing upward and roots going down. And so when we see a field that's got a lot of waves to it, a lot of times that's compaction causing that. And we think about that root force when that radical emerges from that seedling in a corn plant. It has 12 to 14 psi of push power. Pounds per square inch, 12 to 14, that's not very much. If I think about the soils that I've stuck a penetrometer in, I see a lot of soils that are at in the top 2 inches, 150 psi resistance. So how can those roots push through that? And so we need to create an environment that those roots from the radical can push through at 12 to 14 psi. As we get a little bit more age and we get to V2 to V5, we get up to 60 psi of push power. So we're getting a little bit more, so we can handle a little more stress, get through different environments. We get to V5 to V8, we're 100 to 150 psi. So we're starting to fill that top 12 inches. I always say if we worry about the top 12 inches, the good Lord and Mother Nature can take care of the rest. And so if we start looking at that environment in that top 12 inches, if we can create less than 150 psi of resistance in that area with our strip till, then we're doing good things. By the time we get to V9 to VT, we got 200 to 300 pounds per square inch resistance or push power. You think about the resistance out there, and if you've ever used a penetrometer, you don't get over 300 psi. You can get over 300 psi. I've seen 500 to 700 and almost broke my penetrometer and quit. But if we can push through 200 to 300 psi at V9 to VT, so we're starting to get where we can really push through. By the time we get to VT to R2, we can push through 400. So that's why those roots can elongate, especially if we've saved them the energy early on with the strip till, then they can elongate further. We think about tillage comparisons of root depth and root length. And like I said, some of this data is going to be older, and don't let that turn you off. We can learn from this. So if we look at root depth in inches, full tillage versus strip till, our root depth in 2002 in this trial was 40 inches with the full tillage. We were 52 in the strip till. Why was that? Because we created that environment for those roots to grow early on, and they save that energy to grow deeper later. In 03, that data, we were 55 inches long in the full tillage. The strip tillage, we were almost 74 inches long, or deep, excuse me. So you think about that depth, and we push in depth, we're getting deeper. We can get more, capture more water. We can capture more nutrients. How about total inches of roots? In 02, we were about 3,000 inches of roots in that full tillage. That strip till was over 10,000, right at 10,000. That's a huge difference. We think about 03, we were 10,000 with full tillage and almost 27,000 inches of roots. So what happens if you have more roots out there? What do you think is going to happen? We have more advantages to capture nutrients and water. Here's a picture I took, and it's comparing no-till to conventional till and strip till. That no-till and conventional till were struggling early on. That environment that we created with that strip allowed those roots to go deeper. And if you look at it, if we would take that apart and actually measure total root length, I would suggest that the strip till would have more total root length. I utilized this picture earlier in the presentation, and I always said, and I used it, and I said, if there was only a way we could create more roots. On the right-hand side of this picture is strip till, compared to the no-till, and I know this field because I dug these roots myself. And this field, we were measuring 150 psi at 2 inches of resistance. That's a lot, guys and gals. That's a lot of resistance. And in fact, I can see, as I look at this picture, these roots that are doing this, those found a channel. Whether that was an old root channel or a worm channel, they found channels to go down to create a rooting system. If we look at the strip till, we actually had nice loose soil. Those roots could expand and grow around in that loose soil. And that's the difference in the two. Which one of these two plants would capture more water or nutrients? I would say the plants on the right. Look at some older Orthman Research Farm data. This is prior to me joining the forces at Orthman. Strip till rooting depth compared to conventional till rooting depth. June 1st, 20 inches on the strip till. July 1st, 34 inches on the strip till. August 1st, 60 inches. August 18th, 70 inches. Okay, so how's that compared to conventional till? Only 15 inches, 5 inches deeper in the strip till on June 1st, 28 inches on July 1st compared to 34, 48 inches on August 1st versus the 60. Here's the one that I like to think about is August 18th. They were 10 inches. The strip till roots were 10 inches deeper than the conventional till. That's extreme amount of surface area out there to capture roots. So what do you think there was for additional water availability for those roots in 10 inches of extra length? So if we look at that data and we do some calculations, that gives us access to an additional 4.75 inches of water. So if we utilize 26 inches of water to produce a corn plant, and we're 8 inches behind, and we can explore and capture another 4.75, do you think that's going to make a difference? And absolutely.
Got it.
Noah, you look like you have questions.
Yes, got a question for you, Mick. All right. So are these results different for continuous no-till versus rotational tillage? Are the benefits of strip till you're describing only seen in the same growing season, or are they a year-on-year benefit?
So they are a continual improvement in strip till. When we look at long-term strip till versus long-term no-till, unfortunately, we're still installing compaction in every field, no matter what we do. 70 to 80% of the compaction comes from things we as humans do. And whether we're no-till, strip till, or conventional till, we're continually installing compaction. Strip till has the method of mechanical compaction removal. No-till has compaction removal capabilities, but the time frame is a long term. So it takes 5 to 10 years for the worms and everything to break up compaction layers. I can go to a field that has been 20 years of no-till that still has heavy levels of compaction in it, based on the procedures or the things that happened years before it ever started doing no-till. Where the strip till, I am continually taking out any compaction that was installed the year before. Other questions?
Looks like that's it for right now.
Okay. So what about those extra inches of roots? So additional roots access more soil space, more water access. More water equals more yield potential. In a medium to heavy textured soils, 1,000 cubic inch soil volume, there's another gallon of water available. And a gallon of water availability is important, especially when we hit seasons like we are in 2023. IFR did some long-term tillage studies a while back. Don't get concentrated on what the yields were. Just know that the conventional till versus strip till, the strip till was doing better each year. And a lot of that has to do with the amount of energy that corn plant had to produce a rooting system and in getting in through that compaction layer. Mingo, Kansas did another long-term tillage study. I only got 2 years of that data. Both years, 2003 and 2004, the strip till was way better than the conventional till. And when we think about that 2004 in that area, if you understand Mingo, Kansas, it's always dry in Mingo, Kansas. And, it was exceptionally dry that year, and they saw a big advantage in 04. IFR did some limited water trials, and that's where IRF has some advantages of their location. They're in a low rainfall area, low precipitation area. They can back off that water by 66%, 80%, and then compare it to the 100% irrigation and collect some great data off of it. And so this was 03, 04. They did these trials. And if we look, they had in 03, they had 5 inches of rain, and in 04, they had 13 inches of rain. And so they had to supplement that. And whenever they supplemented that, certainly yields went up as the amount of irrigation went up. That's no surprise to us. The big surprise, or the big tell from this trial, is that the strip till was able to take better advantage of the water that was applied through irrigation or rainfall than the conventional till or the full tillage in both years. Colby, Kansas, Freddie Lamb did a trial in 04. That was a fairly dry year for them. Conventional till versus no-till versus strip till. And this kind of goes back to your long-term no-till question, is yes, we can take on more water with no-till. It's certainly, there's no doubt in my mind that no-till is a good way to save water. Strip-till allows for some of those compaction layers to be taken out and more water infiltration. And I think this data set actually shows that quite well, where we see the strip-till having the highest yield, the no-till the second highest yield, and the conventional tillage certainly the least amount of yield. IRF did another one that was published by Monsanto, and it was another limited irrigation trial that they did for just strictly for Monsanto on 2 different hybrids. And you think about the time frame of this and what they were looking for is they're trying to find which hybrids work better in drought, and they got to figure out that strip-till also helps their hybrids in drouthy situations too. So let's go to a different part of the United States. Let's go to somewhere where rainfall is not as limited. Let's go to Georgia and look at that. And this was a trial that it was actually looking more on the side of herbicides, but there's some great data that came out that compared conventional tillage to strip-till. And so they were able to capture that with this data and get it published. And the one thing that they figured out is that there was greater runoff was observed in conventional tilled plots, and this was on cotton. The total sediment and maximum sediment delivery rates in the runoff were greater for conventional till plots compared to the strip-till plots. Greater infiltration rates were observed on the strip-till plots. Greater soil water contents were observed in the top 12 inches of the soil profile of the conventional till plots. So they had more water in the top 12 inches. And when you read this and you're like, well, then there's more water there in the conventional till, so it's better. And one of the thought processes that comes to my mind is that they produced more roots in that top 12 inches. Therefore, there was less moisture there because it went into the plant. Peak surface runoff due to natural rainfall was 5 times greater in the conventional till plots compared to the strip-till plots. 5 times the amount of runoff. And this is in a higher rainfall area than those other studies that we looked at earlier. Yields from the strip-till plots have been equal to or greater than those observed from conventional plots. So we were equal to or greater than yields. And that's a great thing to happen. I'd love to see greater than yields all the time, not necessarily needed. If we think about the conventional till versus strip-till, how many tractor passes are we going to have in a conventional till situation? I can tell you that I know firsthand from a grower that purchased a strip-till unit, and in a year and a half on 4,700 acres of ground that he farms, he paid for his strip-till unit in fuel savings alone, not taking any yields into account, just in fuel savings alone. So if I have equal to yield and recommend strip-till, and I know the guy's going to save fuel, certainly is a good thing to do. One note that they did have this that was a detriment or didn't do well for strip-till is it was some potentially negative observations associated with strip-till were enhanced herbicide leaching. So because this was a herbicide study and they were actually looking at leaching and runoff, they did see leaching occurring with those herbicides. Doesn't surprise me a lot. And then the other thing that they observed was that lower soil moisture in the upper root zone. I can combat that and say, hey, we had more roots there. It went into the plant. Now, if we could turn back the clock and go back and redo this study and watch that, observe the moisture in that plant, I really would like to see those results. So we think about 2015, University of Minnesota published a data. This was a 5-year trial after 5 years of strip till, what happened? We saw organic matter increase 8.6% more than it did in the no-till. So we produce organic matter faster. And why do we produce organic matter faster in strip till versus no-till? Both will grow organic matter compared to full tillage. And the reason we see it grow faster is we're only in strip till, we're basically tilling 1/3 of the field. If you look at the picture behind me, and then we're leaving that residue in between those strips. And if we have a residue from the previous crop, regardless of what strip till machine you're using, you're going to get some soil that spills over, escapes out of the strip, and it may be a little bit, it may be a lot, depending on the machine, and it's going to sprinkle itself on in the center of those strips. And we put that soil there. The soil has microbes, which are our friends that we utilize those microbes, and we need to think about feeding those microbes. And some people call it trash. I call it microbial feed. Residue is a great thing to feed those microbes. So we put a few of those microbes on that surface where the residue is, and we get a little bit of moisture, and they go to work, and they eat up that stuff, and they convert it to organic matter. That's the beauty part of the strip till, and it happens a little bit faster than having it just sit on the surface as we do in no-till. Bulk density decreased by 4% compared to the no-till. So we had a few more air pockets there. We got our bulk density down just a little bit. Penetration resistance. I talk about this a lot. That penetration resistance is very important, especially in that first 2 to 3 weeks of that corn plant or any plant's life cycle. And we were 18% less than the no-till. And we'll see that consistently as we get into longer term trials. This trial said there's no significant differences in infiltration rates or water aggregate stability. I would say not surprised. Basically, we're trying in a strip till situation to create as close to no-till as possible with removal of some compaction layers. I don't know the compaction layers in this field. Some fields it's going to be dramatically different in infiltration rates, and others it's going to be very similar. And it depends on the previous tillage, how long it's been in no-till versus the strip till. Certainly long-term no-till will start to get equal in infiltration rates if we have no compaction layers. Typical water holding capacities. I'm not going to go through this and read you this whole chart. Let's just talk about a silty clay soil. That'll match a lot of our soils that we farm in the Corn Belt. In a silty clay soil, we're going to hold 1.6 inches per foot of water. So you think about that, in 3 feet, we're going to hold 4.8 inches of water. If we say only 30% of that's available, that's 1.44 inches of water available to that plant at that time. So if we can make sure that we have access to that water, that's the key that we need to think about. Here, I left this in after I threw that other one in, and just because I said the amount of water required to grow a corn crop will vary based off of who publishes the data. This is the University of Nebraska. They say 25.9 versus the 26.1 we looked at earlier. And once again, that is showing us the cumulative inches needed. The big time that we needed is that reproductive stage. But certainly if we're dry and we think about my place where I live, and I had the low rainfall from March until July 1st or July 4th, did I have enough water there or not? And if I had strip till and could absorb any of that moisture into that strip, could have been enough to get my crop to live long enough till we got some rainfall. This is a picture, and I've used this a ton in presentations. I got to credit Michael Peterson for this photo. He's used it a ton in presentations. This is after about 1.5 inches of rainfall that morning, and we can see that conventional till, the water standing on the surface. Had there been more slope to this field, it would have ran off. If we look at the strip till, there's a little bit of water standing there, but we have that pore space opened up so that that water can infiltrate, and we can take that water in, and it doesn't run off and it doesn't evaporate, so we can utilize that water. We look at this is a 4-inch by 4-inch segment of soil, and we just picked that out and used that and counted pore sizes. 2 to 5 millimeters pore sizes, so those are these large pores. We had about 9. 1 to 2, those medium pores, we had 25 to 32, and in the small pores we had over 300. I would say if in a long-term no-till situation, you're going to have very, very similar pore spacing. Conventional, we had 5 large pores, about half, a little over half. 1 to 2 millimeter size, so those medium pores, we had 10 to 16, about half. And then 60 to 150 of those small pores, and that's once again about half. And when you look at them side by side, it's a real telling feature of what that strip till did for the infiltration rates. So let's look at another thing that was some older data, but something we can learn. And I just noticed I have a spelling error here, but bear with me. The IRF infiltration rates. So they measured inches of water per hour in moist soils in 2002, 2003, and 2004. Full tillage would infiltrate about 1/2 inch per hour in each one of those 3 years. The strip till was 2.5 to 3.2 inches in that range over those 3-year periods. 2.5 inches, so 2 inches more per hour. What does that mean for us is we're growing crops and we see a 2-inch rainfall event come through. If we can absorb 2 inches per hour in that moist soil already, if we can get 2 inches to go down and be able to be utilized by the roots, that's really phenomenal. To me, that is phenomenal that we could have that and utilize that 2 inches rather than have it run off, rather than lose it to evaporation. So those are something that we can look at. So we've talked for quite a while here, and now we can move on to some conclusions. So 2023 growing season has been a moisture challenge throughout the Corn Belt, no doubt. And looking at the next 10 days, it looks like it's going to continue to be that way. Drought has affected the entire Corn Belt at some way, shape, or form this growing season. We definitely know that. Strip till does remove a shallow compaction layer. It allows precise nutrient placement and prepares the seed bed for us. Consequently, what do we get out of that? We get additional root length. We get deeper roots. We get added access to water and extra yield. More and larger pores out there and increased water infiltrations. With that, I guess we'll open it up to further questions, Noah.
Yeah, Mick, it looks like you covered it pretty well because we have no questions right now. But if anyone has any, this is your last chance to get them in from Mick. Otherwise, if you missed anything during the presentation, this is being recorded, and we're actually going to post a recording of the full webinar on strip-tillfarmer.com. And everyone here and everyone who registered who's not with us live will be able to review that entire webinar recording as well. So
I will be at the Strip Till conference later this week. So Certainly, if more questions arise or you want to sit down and discuss some things more in depth, find me there and we'll go ahead and talk about it.
We've got one at the buzzer, a question right here at the buzzer. Compare strip till with vertical tillage, please, they say.
I'm going to be nice as possible. I do not like vertical tillage. Vertical tillage, in my mind, is a compaction installation tool. And everywhere that I've observed vertical tillage being done in the Corn Belt, we create a hard pan underneath that. And so when we compare that to what I do like about vertical tillage, and I'm going to give it a prop here, is if we need to size residue. If we get into, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball out here. We go to wheat straw that was not cut with a platform and was cut and left stand, and that falls down. Strip till's pretty difficult in that situation. Vertical tillage can go through there and size that residue so that the wheat straw can flow through the strip till machine. And same when we get into ultra high yielding corn environments. A lot of guys think that you have to, if you have 300 bushel corn environment, you have to vertitil because that's the only way you can get a machine through. Let me tell you, there are machines that can go through that. We just have to utilize the machines that can go through that, the strip till machines that can handle that residue. I do know of several of those.
Yeah, we have another question now. They want to know, how important is it to remove existing compaction horizons before starting to strip till?
Beauty part is the strip till takes care of it for us. As I said in my presentation, I worry about the top 12 inches. Below that, if I try to deep rip, and I know deep ripping is common in some places. If I try to deep rip, all I'm doing is giving a very short term relief to the compaction layers that are below that 12-inch zone. So as long as I take care of that top 12 inches, I'm happy with what we can do, because as we get older, those plants can push with more push power.
Couple more questions coming in. For drought mitigation preparedness, how many years of strip till on average does it take to see better infiltration and water holding?
Better infiltration and water holding generally can occur year one with strip till, as long as we can address that shallow compaction layer. The only reason it wouldn't is if, say, we were only strip tilling at 6 inches and that shallow compaction layer went down to about 8 inches. I always say, when I'm talking to growers, make sure that you're half an inch to an inch below that compaction layer so that we make sure that we address it. And that's why carrying around a compaction probe or potentiometer is something I do every day.
Any thoughts on integrating slotting with strip till? We have sands out here and some are compacted. Integrating topsoil with lower sand layers is supposed to help with infiltration and compaction.
Repeat that question one more time.
Yeah, so they said they want to know, do you have any thoughts on integrating slotting with strip till?
I don't like the slotting. I would continue to look at strip till. If you're in sands, you want to narrow those strips up. Instead of a 12-inch strip, maybe go to an 8-inch strip. Now, that gives up some of our planter ride because our gauge wheels can't stay in an 8-inch strip, but it helps eliminate some blowing of that sand.
Someone wants to know if you could touch on, tips or basics of what it takes to build a correct strip.
So a correct strip, I like to see a strip that, if you look at the picture that's on the screen right now, I like to see that strip be level with the rest of the field. And the reason being, I know the term berm is out there and it's used by a lot of people in the strip till industry, but if I create a berm or a hump out there, I create somewhere for that water to run. If I create a level surface, then when it does rain, the water's going to search out the path of least resistance and go into that strip itself. Other things is work with the manufacturer that you choose. I'm biased. I don't want to say one versus another, but every manufacturer should have somebody out there in the field helping you set that device, that strip till machine, because it's so important to get it set correctly. And I will tell you from experience, if somebody did not support a machine that they sold and it was set incorrectly, somebody got a bad taste in their mouth. And I've seen it happen with a lot of different companies. And so I would encourage you to reach out to whoever you bought that machine from, or the manufacturer if you bought it used, and get help setting that machine correctly.
Interesting. I'm guilty of using the word berm a lot in the articles I write, so I'll keep that in mind. And also, when I write these articles too, I go back and forth. Do you prefer the term making strips or building strips, or either or? Does it matter?
Either or. That one I don't have a problem with as much. To me, when I think of a strip and people wanting a berm, we can't make more soil. It takes thousands and thousands of years to make more soil. So if I create a berm there, what did I do? I either brought more soil in from the outside, or I injected air into that strip. And roots and air don't get along at all. And if a root hits an air pocket, that root dies. So I want to build a strip that doesn't have air pockets in it. I know in the Eastern Corn Belt, they say, oh, well, our soil's going to settle. You're not going to get that much settling if you have the machine set correctly. Another, I will say, myth out there is that you can't strip till in hills. If you have the right strip till set correctly, you can strip till in hills and slopes and not get any washing. The key there is to make sure that we're getting rid of that shallow compaction layer, number one, first and foremost, because otherwise the water's going to infiltrate down and then start running down that compaction layer down the hillside. A lot of times when we see washing and strip till, it's because we're not strip tilling deep enough.
Well, it looks like those are all the questions we have. Nothing else. Well, we got one right now. Which is better, strip till in the market is the question. So maybe that's asking about, equipment. I'm sure you would have I think I would know your take on that one. So
I think I would probably be more biased than anything. So I won't answer that question because we're not in a commercial here.
Got it. Okay. Well, I guess we'll see you next week at the National Strip Tillage Conference, Mick, you and the entire crew out there at Orthman by Unverth. Thanks so much for being part of this webinar and hosting this. A lot of great information. And like I said, we'll publish this recording here in a couple days. So this will be on striptillfarmer.com if you want to rewatch it or share it with one of your coworkers or friends. And if you're interested in coming to the Strip Till Conference, shameless plug, we accept walk-up registrations and all that in Bloomington Normal. So if you want to go out there and see Mick and the crew, they'd love to have you. So any last words, Mick, before we let you go?
Just a quick thank you for everybody for watching. Thank you for having me, Noah, and I appreciate everybody's time and patience.
Yeah, thank you. And like Mick said, thank you everybody for watching. On behalf of Strip Till Farmer, Orthman by Unverth, and Mick Godekin, thank you so much for watching this webinar, and have a great day.